Okay, let's try this again. If you follow my posts on the community tab, you'll know that the first time I recorded this video, I tested the mic and then my sweater like fell over it and apparently muffled the sound, and like it kind of flopped back and forth over the course of the video. So the sound cuts in and out and the whole thing was unusable. So let's try it again. This video is going to be a little bit of an experiment. I'm still very much in the newbie experimentation phase of this channel. And one of the things that people have been asking me for is either to post an audiobook of some of my books on YouTube or to post a video where I'm just reading a selection from one of my books. Well, I looked into the audiobook thing and well, for starters, I would love to be able to pay a professional to record audiobooks of all my books so that they would be accessible to everyone who has trouble reading or just doesn't have time for it for various reasons. But audiobooks cost a lot of money, especially if you get a good narrator. So then I thought, well, maybe I could record the audiobook myself. It might not be as professional, but at least it would exist. But it looks like I will have to buy a new microphone. I'll have to create like a soundproof area in my house, which I don't know how I would do that. And I would have to read the entire book as well as do a lot of edits, learn how to use a new editing software. Anyway, there's just no way that I have time to do that anytime in the near future. But I thought, well, if people are already listening to me talk about whatever, maybe I could just post a video where I'm reading the book to you and it wouldn't be up to like the Audible standard or anything as far as, you know, you might hear cats in the background, you might hear wind, you might hear, you know, some interference, but not any differently than when you listen to me talk on my videos. And at least it would be out there in some capacity. I looked around on YouTube to see if anyone had ever done this, and as far as I could tell, there really wasn't any like novelists just sitting down and reading their novels to YouTube as if they were in your house reading to you. So that means I really have no idea if people would like this or not. So why don't I give it a shot? And the book I'm going to read is Doll Girl Meets Dead Guy. Now the copy I have is from when I rebranded it as A Taste of Magic for a bit. This is my last copy of this branding before I order fresh copies of Doll Girl. But nevertheless, it's the same book. And the reason I'm reading Doll Girl is because the Cursed Soul trilogy is already in audiobook. The rights were bought by Tantor. The Broken Queen comes out this week, but I'm putting it in Kindle Unlimited for release because it's a very long book and I want to get those page reads. So since it's exclusive to Amazon right now, I can't put it on YouTube yet. And of course, I did want to put up one of the books that is in my personal fantasy world and not one of the ones that I wrote more to trend. Although that's a possibility if this video ends up doing decently well. So I'm going to read as much of Doll Girl as my voice and the timing of the day can handle, basically. And at the end of the video, I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the inspirations in the writing of the book. That's another thing I figured I might as well experiment with. So if you've already read it, you can skip ahead to the end of the video. So without further ado, here is Doll Girl Meets Dead Guy by Lydia Foxglove. Oh, and by the way, if you have any concerns about screen burn-in, if you're watching this on a TV, I'm gonna shift the picture and maybe add stock photos or something like that here and there so that that doesn't happen, because I have that problem with my TV. Chapter 1. Sorla's hand trembled with excitement at the all-too-familiar gold seal on the letter. Her hopes had already spiked when she saw the twinkle in the eye of the mail courier. "Well, what's the prince have to say this time?" Elam asked. The courier never hesitated to wait around for the opening of an interesting letter. Sorla didn't really mind his prying because she liked everyone to know she had the favor of the handsome, young, eligible crown prince of Lioness. What other girl could say that, especially a Finarlem? Elam never pushed to hear the whole thing. He just wanted a tidbit. She slid her thumb under the seal and pulled it up, unfolding the envelope, savoring the moment, her whole being quickened at the sight of the smooth and substantial cream-colored royal paper. 2 thick pages poked out. The letters were never more than a page. Getting more excited by the minute, she skimmed it so she could give Elam his crumb of news and get rid of him, but as the words jumped out at her, she gasped. "He proposin'," Elam teased. "He's offering me a job at the royal bakery," Sorla shrieked, completely unable to contain herself. "Making pastry for him and the king and queen." She clutched Elam's arm and shook it, and he shook her right back. "Well, our little town baker is going to be famous." So you're leaving us just like that. No sympathies for the taste buds of peasants. I have to. Oh, fates. Oh, I have to. Finally, a chance to make something of herself in a larger city. Now the back door of the cafe opened, and Grau looked at her. Is everything all right back here? Has someone sent us a bag of money? It'd damn sure come in handy. No, Feyrin. Well, maybe in a sense, if things go well. Elam gave Grau a friendly nod, getting the idea that it was time for him to spread the word all over town and let the Thano family handle their own business. Is that from Prince Seldon? Grau asked, with the tiniest hint of fatherly suspicion. What is he saying? Why are you glowing? Do I have to make an assassination attempt? Reality crashed in, and Sorla realized that Grau and Velsa would be extremely reluctant to let her go to the capital, even at Seldon's invitation. They were very protective of her, too protective sometimes, as if she hadn't managed on her own without them, as if their entire family wasn't a comforting sort of lie. She called them Meyrin and Feyrin like parents, but Finarlem didn't have parents. He's giving me a job at the Royal Bakery. In Lioness? His fatherly frown was now joining the furrowed brow. Just you, by yourself. I'm sure I wouldn't be by myself. Seldon would have thought of safe accommodations, and you know me. Once I'm there, I'll do nothing but work and sleep. Which was all Sorla did now. She was 22 years old, with no one courting her, and no sign that anyone in this town ever would, nor that she would ever do anything but work, sleep, and live with her adopted family for the next 100 years, at minimum. Grau said, which just meant he was mulling over it all. Are you two coming back in? It's the lunch rush, Velsa cried, appearing behind him and then vanishing again. In her wake came Sorla's pet wyvern, Blueberry, who didn't like it when anyone yelled at anyone else. He started flying around Sorla and Grau, chastising them with loud squawks for leaving the cafe in a lurch. Velsa was the one yelling, but Blueberry was smart enough to know that Sorla was at fault. With a sigh, Sorla tucked the letter into the depths of her apron, knowing it wouldn't be decided until the quiet of evening. Well, that isn't quite true, she corrected herself. I'm going whether they want me to or not. I have to. I'll regret it for the rest of my life if I don't. And who would say no to the Crown Prince? Chapter 2. Sorla loved her home and family and their little cafe with all her heart. The last thing she would ever want was to take it all for granted. She knew all too well what it was like to have nothing of your own and no one to love you. She would never deny that she had all good things in abundance here, even in her most restless moods. She woke in her own room, tucked under a soft quilt that she and Meyrin had sewn together one winter, with Blueberry's sleek head popping up the moment hers did, his bright reptilian eyes gleaming with excitement to start the day with his mistress. The room smelled slightly of wyvern piss, no matter how much she scrubbed the floor, but it was somewhat covered up by the smell of baking pastries. Sorla stirred before Grau and Velsa most mornings by her own preference. She liked having a little time and space in the hushed darkness before dawn, to do what she did best, make the pastries and breads that would soon lure in everyone in the neighborhood. At this time of year, while she didn't have much fresh fruit to play with, the long end of winter days would bring in a local crowd eager for hot coffee and Sorla's flaky apple tarts and nut buns. She was famous for the spring wild berry cake decorated with violet petals, and the spiced pumpkin bread she started making every year on the autumn equinox, and no sooner. There would be a line out the door that morning. As with most days, they were busy, not just through lunch, but up until sunset when Velsa finally locked the door and flopped into a chair. Sometimes I think we're a little too successful, she exclaimed. I'm tired down to my bones. Don't worry about that, Ballora. I think we're about to lose most of our business, Grau said, with a small smile at Sorla to show he didn't begrudge her the opportunity. But Sorla didn't relax yet. He still had that worried furrow. Our head baker is thinking of leaving. What? Velsa looked at Sorla. Leaving? Are you two in on some plan without me? No, nothing like that, Sorla said. I wasn't planning anything. I just had a letter today from Prince Seldon, and he wants me to work in the Royal Bakery. Velsa got a suspicious look, although she was trying to hide it, and would have succeeded with anyone who didn't know her well. He doesn't have enough experienced bakers, she asked carefully. In the capital? Well, I think he wants to help me out, Sorla said, and then she cursed herself. I should have thought better about how to explain this. I think he would like to give good jobs to Finarlem to bring greater equality to the kingdom. And there aren't hundreds of Finarlem in Lioness. Well, sure, but none of them make my apple cake or my savory tarts or my pies, and I'm confident of that. Velsa chewed her lip. Sorla, you certainly are an amazing chef, and I'm sure you can hold your own at a royal bakery. And I want you to have those opportunities, but it is a little odd that the prince, I mean, how much free time does a prince have? And men can be... She glanced at Grau. Men are the worst, he said. You're not, Sorla said. No, I'm as good as it gets, and that concerns me. Oh, come on, don't tease me. You've met Seldon. It's not like he's obsessed with me. He writes me a letter about 3 times a year, and it's only a page. If he had some ulterior motive, I think he'd write more than that. Plus, they're very professional letters. Of course it was a wonder that the Crown Prince took the time to write her any letters at all, and she thought about him constantly. She used to talk about him way too much with every letter he sent, but then she learned to tamp it down before she lost all her friends. Anyway, she was young and awkward then, and it was to be expected. She had dreamed of him asking her to come to Lioness for any reason at all, and what their reunion would be like. She imagined him telling her that he had never forgotten her since he'd met her on his official travels and danced with her at the Feast of Maidens. Sorla prayed that Velsa, being a talented telepath, had never picked up on any of that. While it was rare for even skilled telepaths to read minds, they did read feelings. Even Sorla, whose power was much weaker, picked up on feelings sometimes. I have to worry about you a little, Velsa said. Both of us do. I'm not teasing, Grau said. Men are terrible. We've told you all the stories about how they would treat Velsa right in front of my face. It would be a dangerous delusion to think that Finarlem women aren't extremely vulnerable, even in Miralem lands. If Velsa and I didn't have as much magic as we do, life might be more perilous. I'm not a naive child, Sorla said, and I never was. That was the one thing about pretending to have parents. Sometimes they started to forget that when they found Sorla, she was entirely on her own and had been for years. She had more experience surviving all alone than they did. Yes, I know, Velsa said, backing off. We're not going to forbid you from doing anything. And I know you have a lot of experience in the darker side of the world, but you've never been alone and beautiful. I hardly think I'm beautiful, Sorla scoffed. I'm not exactly turning heads here. I don't know. Name one turning head, Sorla said. Reuven, and you know it. Just because he's marrying someone else, well, princes can have consorts, but farm boys have to think of starting a family. Seldon doesn't want me for a consort. This isn't some skeezy place like Atlantis, Sorla huffed. I know you'll worry, but just think, a royal baker. I'll send money home. You don't have to send money home, Grau said. I'd certainly hope the 2 of us can manage without you. But we have to warn you about these things. One thing I learned when I left home is that the world can be astoundingly cruel and harsh, and the safety you took for granted at home might not travel with you. Maybe Prince Seldon has nothing but honorable intentions, but sooner or later you'll meet someone who doesn't. Someone who feels that attractive Finarlem girls were made to be abused or exploited. People here say they don't think that way, but their actions don't always back that up, especially strangers. I know, Sorla said. I do know. I'll be on guard. A little doubt crept in. It was true that Finarlem were originally created to be enslaved, and Sorla had still spent more years of her life in bondage than not. Like nearly all Finarlem, her bones were made of wood, and her skin was made of cloth, with wool stuffing, metal joints, and glass eyes. Without magic, she was just a doll. But hundreds of years ago, flesh and blood people had discovered the magic that called souls into inanimate forms. Although it was said that the first Finarlem was made to bring back the soul of a sorcerer's beloved wife, as far as history knew, the discovery had only heralded the birth of a slave race, their production quickly adopted by the colonites of the West and South. Although the magic made Finarlem mimic real people in many ways, they were also immune to cold, heat, and poison that could kill a flesh and blood person, and they felt only fleeting pain. Like nearly all Finarlem, Sorla had no real parents, no blood to share, and her memories began in some unknown early year of her life. She started out in a wealthy house, brought up to be the companion of 2 little girls. Sorla had played with them, but also helped them dress, fetched their meals, cleaned their bedroom and nursery, and did everything she could to serve her young mistresses. Sorla had no memory of being taught to serve. It seemed she had been born to do it, but the reality would have been that someone showed her the ropes from the moment she could walk and talk. After spending her childhood in the relative safety of the family, she had been sold off to be a servant for rent, losing her only home and the love she thought they had for her. She was naive then, not now. In these dark days, Sorla had to learn to rely only on herself and snatch every small pleasure she could from life. Velsa had seen her and rented her on the spot, and from that point on, Grau and Velsa treated her like family and scrimped the money to buy her. They gave her freedom and then purchased her ticket to the real world, a more expensive body that gave her this so-called beauty. Finarlem who were made to work looked more like dolls, crudely fashioned. But almost as soon as Finarlem were invented, sorcerers started honing the spells that gave them life, learning how to craft them better and layer in powerful illusions to enhance their creations. Before long, a small group of Finarlem were made to be concubines and pleasure slaves. Into this rare tribe was Velsa born, crafted so finely that she almost looked real, but not too real either. Any man inclined to be attracted to Finarlem at all might say they were more beautiful than anything real, and Grau had always looked at Velsa like he certainly thought so. Of course, he also clearly loved her heart and mind, which was how it must be, even though her body had come from a concubine maker. She wasn't quite as beautiful as a true concubine. Or maybe it was her personality. Or maybe, probably, boys here just didn't think of any Finarlem girl that way. It was the Darmon race who made Finarlem to use and abuse, and they had since moved to the lands of the Miralem for a better life. Here slavery was utterly illegal and immoral. Miralem men were also very different. On the whole, they were very respectful to women, and as she was getting older, she thought it might be nice if someone wasn't just respectful, although she certainly wanted that, but maybe also thrilled and excited by her. Well, in the end, you've always had a good head on your shoulders, Grau said. Velsa nodded. And we'd never want to keep you from making a better life for yourself, or for this family to feel like an obligation and not something good. She sighed softly, as if she was trying to keep Sorla from hearing it. We'll miss you very much, and you can come home any time, of course, if things don't work out like you expected. Is Prince Seldon sending a carriage for you? Grau asked. No, he just asked if I would come to the capital to take the job. Nothing about transportation. Well, that does bring up a genuine concern. Maybe he'll offer you a good position in a safe home once you're there, but how do we get you there? I'll put my foot down before I send you alone on a public coach. And I can't leave Velsa running the cafe by herself while I escort you. Sorla's hopes and dreams plummeted before she quickly remembered her old motto. Don't slow down long enough to let despair catch up. I'll find someone, she said decisively. I'll ask around. Surely someone in town needs to make the trip. You'll find a way, Velsa said. Being a royal baker does have such a distinguished ring to it, and we know there's a good Finarlem maker there in case you need anything. Yes, the very best, Grau said. I'll write him a letter and tell him you're coming, so if you need anything... Stop, Sorla said, embarrassed that her father was about to ask his pen pal, the Finarlem maker of Lioness, to watch over her, when she didn't know the man at all. I'll be fine, and I don't even know when I can secure passage yet. Just let me handle it. I don't feel like I was ever a kid, but I'm definitely an adult now, and old enough to figure all of this out by myself. Grau and Velsa both looked like they wanted to argue this point, for 22 years old was considered old enough for courting and working, but the Miralem called the age of 16 to 30 the sunrise adulthood, when the sun had not yet fully risen on one's maturity, and it was normal for parents to be quite involved. Velsa married Grau when she was 18, so they both had to stay quiet about it. Besides that, there was a war on, and many young people had already grown up faster than usual. If the butcher's nephew and the florist's daughter could go fight in wars in their sunrise adulthood, Sorla could certainly work in a bakery right next to the royal palace. I'll go ask Reuven if he's heard anything, she said, scooping up Blueberry to take a walk, doing her best to ignore the anxious clench in her innards that always rose up when she laid eyes on the first boy she had ever loved. Chapter 3. It was a short walk to Reuven's from their cottage, turning away from the bustle of the shop rows to the farmland just outside the town. Snow still glowed thick and pale under clusters of dark evergreens in the dusk, and ice clung to the rocks in the stream beneath the plank bridge. Sorla gazed at the late winter landscape with fresh eyes, her lantern catching the sparkle of the frozen world, realizing she might be leaving it unexpectedly. Blueberry flew ahead, excited to see his old litter mates and the other wyverns at the family farm. Reuven and his family raised the small beasts. Although wyverns looked like miniature dragons, they lacked the high intelligence and strong telepathic and fire-generating magic of their huge counterparts. But they were smart, smarter than dogs. They could be trained to do all sorts of useful tasks, and to guard their owners and homes. They were too smart for some people, especially with their dexterous little hands. Sorla was a wyvern devotee for life, however. She loved teaching Blueberry new tricks and skills, even if it meant he could open cabinets and jars and unlock doors, causing occasional chaos. Growl had forbidden them all from lighting matches in sight of Blueberry, just in case he learned to set things on fire. Sorla loved wyverns, and with all her being, she tried not to love the boy who raised them. Sorla? Hello. Reuven was out flinging a feed at a dozen wyverns, who were clambering over each other in midair to catch it, when she came walking up with her punch tin lantern in hand. She opened the hinge and blew out the candle so she would have some left for her walk home. Reuven dusted off his hands. What brings you by? Joining us for dinner? Hi, Sorla, Reuven's fiancée Alusha chimed in from behind him. I wouldn't invite myself to dinner, Sorla said. I'm inviting you, Reuven said, grinning in the dusk. We made those delicious potatoes, Alusha said. Oh, Sorla said, thinking of Alusha and Reuven's ma slicing the potatoes together and having a grand old time. Sometimes she envied them all for needing food and sharing it together. Finarlem could eat, thanks to magic, but they didn't have to, and often her family was too busy feeding the other people to share a proper meal. That's tempting. I'll have a tiny bit if you have enough. I'm sorry, I would have brought some pastry leftovers if I'd known. I really just wanted to get the word out about some business. Business? Reuven flung out the rest of the feed and tossed aside the basket. You think about business too much. Just have a visit and relax. The clean March air was full of the sound of wyverns chirping and snapping and growling at each other for choice bits. Blueberry dove in before Sorla could stop him. Blueberry, you can eat at home, she scolded. Who cares? He is home, Reuven said. You're all welcome here any time, you know that. Does the business have anything to do with your letter from the prince today? Alusha said. That's so exciting. The prince must be awfully taken with you to write you all the time. Doesn't he just ask you about how he can help Finarlem causes? Reuven asked. Oh good, he's jealous. Sorla brightened. Reuven and Alusha made a very cute couple. She tried hard not to feel jealous herself. But she would never forget how shocked she felt when Alusha showed up in town and got engaged with Reuven out of nowhere. Apparently they were childhood playmates, but Sorla thought Reuven liked her more than he liked the other town girls. Instantly she felt like the biggest idiot when this fair, shining flesh-and-blood woman had Reuven's arm. Of course he would want to have children to work the farm and all of that normal stuff. He never would have been serious about her. She would be satisfied enough now if he just quietly pined for her and never forgot her until the day he died. At least that was something. It didn't help that when she met Reuven, she mistook him for a girl, but now he had shot up in height and his back was broad and muscular from physical work on the farm. His jawline and nose had traded the softness of youth for strong masculine lines, but he still had beautiful lips and blonde bangs he was always shoving out of his blue eyes. Alusha looked like she could be his sister, but when Sorla asked Reuven if they were related when she first appeared, he'd just laughed. Of course not. We all look alike to you, huh? Reuven's family greeted her warmly, as they always did, and the heavy wooden table was so jammed full with food that some dinner plates hung off edges, and the tablecloth woven with orange and red flowers could hardly be seen. Steam rose from warm loaves of bread, root vegetables, spiced apples, and the famous creamy potatoes lashed with bacon, only one of many hearty recipes Marini was famous for in town. Even in her awkward solitude without a mate of her own, Sorla knew she would always feel at home here, as she did from the start. They were such kind people. Even though they'd never had Finarlem as neighbors before, they welcomed Sorla and her parents from the day they arrived. They all gathered round the table, parents and 2 younger siblings, all fair and merry and well-fed looking, excited to have any company, as if it was an uncommon occurrence, and they didn't invite some neighbor or other on the regular. The fire crackled behind Reuven's father, and Myrene lit the beeswax candles. Sorla wondered if the royal bakery would be as comfortable as this. The royal palace, she recalled, was cold and grand, with its huge rooms. "So you got another letter from the Crown Prince today, is that right? Is he doing well?" Myrene asked. She always worried over whether the prince was doing well, ever since his oldest brother's assassination, as if she might have to go to the capital herself and make some food to cheer him up. "He's fine, I think," Sorla said. "He asked me to come work at the royal bakery." The dinner table erupted into excitement. "The royal bakery? Our Sorla at the royal bakery?" "How about that? This calls for the dandelion wine," Reuven's father said. Sorla didn't remind him that Finarlem couldn't enjoy the effects of alcohol. He probably just wanted an excuse to enjoy it himself. "So you're leaving?" Reuven asked. "It's an incredible opportunity. I have to give it a try." "You certainly do," Myrene agreed. "The whole town will be in mourning not to have your pastries," Alusha said. "I'm sure they'll manage," Sorla said modestly, enjoying every minute of it. "But I am looking for a safe ride to the capital, so I came to put the word out. If you need any supplies for spring plantings, perhaps." Sorla tried to sound casual. She knew perfectly well that no one had to go all the way to Lyoness for supplies. But she hoped that Reuven might just do it for old time's sake. He was her friend, and he could be protective of her when the occasion called for it. There was a time before Alusha came along when he seemed like he'd do anything to make her happy. Reuven's brows knotted in worry, just like Grau. "I wish I could, but..." Sorla paused with her plate heaped with food she hadn't asked for. "It's a ways, and with spring coming on so fast, and the wedding, and..." Yes, of course, I understand completely. You're so busy at this time of year, for sure, especially this year. I'll find someone." "I'll ask around for you," Myrene said. "Someone will be going to the capital before long." "It just better be someone who will watch over Sorla," Reuven said. Alusha nodded earnestly. "Especially with the shady characters on the road these days." Alusha was so sweet. Reuven and Alusha were perfect together. By next year, they would probably have a baby. Sorla couldn't wait to get out of this town and hopefully find a life that belonged to her, instead of just crashing someone else's dinner. Chapter 4. Work usually kept Sorla occupied enough that she didn't have time to worry, and that was one reason she always worked so hard. The other reason, of course, was that she just took pride in a job well done. She always had, thank the fates, even when her work had gone ignored. And these days it was never ignored. She was always trying to outdo herself, and the locals usually bought every last bit of her specials, along with the old favorites, eagerly awaiting each season's bounty and throwing spare coins in the tip jar. But this week, she didn't have the enthusiasm for a new recipe. She was anxious and distracted, thinking of her charming Prince of Letters. People said Prince Seldon wasn't handsome, but Sorla thought he was an uglyish handsome, more interesting than the usual kind. Plain white bread was good after all, but also very boring. The prince was more like Sorla's savory red cabbage and juniper tart, which a lot of people didn't like, but the ones who did liked it more than anything. Days passed, and she couldn't find anyone to take her to the capital. Then, at the passing of another week, she worried that she had better answer the letter at least. Seldon would surely wonder if she didn't even thank him for the offer. She started to second-guess herself, as she rarely had before. Did the offer have a time limit? Maybe he would hire someone else to fill this open position. No, she read the all-too-brief letter for the 20th time that day. He was very clear. The royal bakery needed a baker, and I think you would be perfect for the job considering your background. If this suits you, please come. What if Mayrin and Feyrin were right after all and he did want her as a consort? What if he'd been waiting and biding his time? He never said anything like that, but what would she say if she got there and he offered that instead? Would it be very romantic or actually very horrifying? I don't even have the right parts for that. When Velsa and Grau got her this nice realistic body, Sorla told them not to give her womanly parts, because she knew Finarlem were at higher risk for being assaulted. They still lived in Daramon lands back then, and the Daramons believed that Finarlem were tainted souls who could only be redeemed by serving the cruelest whims of their creators. But men wouldn't usually bother if they realized their victim wasn't equipped for it. Sorla felt she was safe now, and yet it seemed both weird and impractical to ask for a trip to the Finarlem maker out of nowhere when no one was courting her. But she also got the sense she was missing out on certain feelings and private experiences the other girls whispered about. In the very unlikely event that Prince Seldon did want to have sex with me, I suppose I would have some excuse for putting him off, and I could run home if I needed to. She couldn't really imagine the prince turning into such a lecherous creature when she saw him again, however. He had always been respectful. If he ever did think of her that way, he would probably be slow and tender. "Hey, daydreamer, are you in there? I just asked for a black coffee." She looked up and Dalaran was standing right at the counter. Ugh, of all the people to catch her in an embarrassing daze of imagining Prince Seldon touching her. Thank the fates Finarlem didn't blush. She poured the coffee. "Here." "What kind of customer service is that?" "The kind you deserve." Dalaran, the local necromancer, was nothing but trouble and always had been. If he wasn't outright on the run from someone he owed a debt to, or trying to borrow money, he was just annoying. Plus, he rarely ordered more than a single cup of black coffee, and left no tip. "Ouch," he said, smoothing his black curls. He just looked like trouble, too. Almost rakish, but too sickly and sly to manage it well, with fangish teeth and clothes that could always use mending, cleaning, or the clasps lined up the correct way. "And here I came to help you out. I hear you're looking for a ride to the capital." Sorla's eyes widened with horror. "No, not from you. Just drink your coffee in the corner." She pointed to an empty table. Mara, an older lady who was one of the many regulars, muttered, "Leave her alone, Dalaran. She's not making any deals with you, not under my watch." "Nor in any other case," Sorla said. "We all know your deals are devil's bargains, and I'm not some desperate kid." "Humph," he said, leaning on the counter. "I'm not the one riding to the capital, and I'm not asking for money. This is just me being a decent citizen. I'm trying to help you out." "Nobody trusts you, Dalaran. Leave her alone," Mara said, getting out of her chair now. Sorla crossed her arms. "Who is it? Who is this mysterious person going to the capital?" "You may have heard that my cousin Dorathan just came back from the front lines, and I've been helping him recover," Dalaran said. "I haven't heard that," Mara said, and now Sorla wished she would step back out of it. "I hadn't either," Sorla said. "You've never mentioned a cousin." "Well, we're not close. That branch of the family doesn't like me much." "So maybe they're not so bad," Sorla said. She genuinely disliked Dalaran, but the one thing she did like about him is that she could hassle him endlessly and he didn't get upset. It was good practice for the travelers who could be quite rude. "Exactly," Dalaran said. "He's a good, upstanding sort of person, and all that. And his family has more money, too, so there's a family home in the capital where he's going back to recover. He'd be a good traveling companion. He's quiet, big guy, people don't mess with him, but he would never hurt a lady. And he's just seen the horrors of war. He's in no mood to cause trouble, just wants to get home as fast as he can." "The horrors of war," Sorla repeated. "Well, if that's true, goddess bless him," Mara said, "assuming he fought on our side." "Of course he did," Dalaran said, as he was of the Vendiri, a group of Daramons who had settled in the Miralem lands and rejected the beliefs of their kindred. "All of my family are here and devoted to old ways." "But why would they send the poor guy to recuperate at your house?" Sorla asked. But as soon as she said the words, she knew the answer. It was confirmed by Dalaran's long pause, unusually serious for him. "There's only one reason they ever send him to me," he said. The visiting cousin, likely sent to the only necromancer who would take him in these times, had arrived here as a corpse. Chapter 5. "Ooh," Velsa winced as Sorla told her parents the situation. "I just don't understand why the Vendiri do such things. Let the dead rest." You're one to talk, Grau grinned. I seem to remember you bringing me back from the dead once. That's different. You clung to life and gave me your consent. Grau shook a little more spicy sauce onto his rice and egg. Bringing people back is just the Vendiri way when they can manage it. They don't look at death the same way we do. I'm more worried about sending Sorla off with any relative of Dalaran's than the fact that he was dead for a bit. Should we all meet with him, Velsa asked. We could sense him out with our telepathy, Sorla, and we should get an idea. She paused. Do the undead ever look corpsey? If they do, we'll get a taste of what it's like when the hill folk come into town and see Finarlem for the first time, and they're not used to it, Grau said. When you put it like that, Velsa said. But we're not rotting, Sorla said. We're not juicy or waxen, bloated, Velsa murmured. Yikes, Grau said. It can't be that bad or no one would do it. I'm sure this man isn't that mouse in the rain barrel. No, he said you wouldn't mention that mouse again, Velsa cried. She really hated finding small animals dead. Scree! Scree! Blueberry flew up and flapped his wings into Grau's rice bowl. Curses, Grau snapped as his precious egg rice went flying off the tips of Blueberry's wings. The price of imported rice had skyrocketed since border trade at the river shut down, the humble meal turning into a luxury. I was just trying to say that it's worth meeting him since you've had no luck otherwise. Either he's a perfectly nice corpse, or he's clearly related to Dalaran, and you'll be back at the start, Grau said, swatting Blueberry off. Well, maybe this is a sign I should get back to work. I'll clean up, Sorla said, since it was her pet destroying the place, as usual. As Grau slipped out of dinner to get back to his potions work, Sorla looked at Velsa. Will you be okay here? She asked softly. I swear that we do know how to survive without you, Velsa said with a wry smile. The customers might be disappointed, but I've done enough of the baking over the years that I can keep the doors open, I'm sure. I don't mean it like that, but it's not what you love doing, and Faerun is preoccupied. Sorla certainly didn't want to offer criticism on Grau and Velsa's marriage when they seemed as happy as anyone she'd ever known, and it was very hard for her to think badly of Grau himself. When they first took her in, they were in the Daramon lands, and Sorla suspected Velsa had been created to be a concubine, even though her and Grau were pretending otherwise. She was too pretty, her movements too delicate and practiced, and she had a glimmer of fear in her eyes that hinted she was living a lie and could be in danger any moment. But Sorla was in immediate awe of the man she would one day call her father. Of all the masters she had served, sometimes the wives were the cruelest of all. But just as often they were dripping with hollow compassion and minuscule kindnesses for Sorla before they told her what to do. The men, however, were usually absent and ignored her completely. They were the overarching masters of the household, often absent, coming home to dole discipline on the children, eat, and take their wife to bed, presumably in the hopes of creating more children to discipline. And then there was Grau, at that time working for the city-state, participating in the mysterious daily work of a sorcerer, but then coming home every night to Velsa, spending time with her, talking with her and not at her, the two of them laughing and murmuring, and then even welcoming Sorla into their orbit. Grau bought cakes and joked around with them and reassured Velsa when she worried. He was protective of his family in a way Sorla had never seen before, like his spirit was a shelter. However, it was his dream to develop potions for a living, and when they had all decided to open the cafe, that was Sorla's dream, and she had always been the primary baker. Grau didn't do any baking, and he was not that great with customers either. He didn't mind cleaning the kitchen or the dining areas, but Sorla usually felt the need to come in after him and do a better job. Mostly for the past 8 years, he had been trying to develop potions that would improve the creation of Finarlem. He had some success, but nothing that was really viable. I know I'll be doing most of the work here, Velsa said, but it's fine. Developing new magical methods is not quick work. I just hope you get enough help. Running a cafe was my dream, not yours. And making potions is Faerun's dream. But I feel like you're getting stuck without any dreams. My dreams aren't possible yet, Velsa said, so I don't mind putting them aside for now. I feel absolutely sure that when the opportunity presents itself, Grau will make sacrifices for me too. Everything doesn't have to happen right this second. I guess you've always had more patience than I do. Sometimes. What are your dreams, Mayrin? I have a few. I'm not sure which one will end up being right. I'm fascinated by the non-magical devices we saw when we lived in Nalim Ima. Not the ones they're using to go to war with us, but the ones that make music and the photograph. I'd like to know how they work. Her eyes flicked up toward the bedroom, where she kept a photograph of her and Grau when Grau still had a flesh and blood body, before he'd been killed and had to become a Finarlum. Other times, I think that when Grau does develop some breakthrough potion for Finarlum, I'd like to help him sell it. I'd like to help Finarlum form stronger communities and work together to improve their lot. Sort of like we've done here, where we all get together now and then, and we all know which businesses to patronize and which not to patronize, and so on. And other times... You do have a lot on your mind already, Sorla said, somewhat reassured that Velsa had dreams of her own. Well, other times I still dream of just moving far away from everyone with Grau and having a cozy little house and a garden and 2 horses and minding our own business. People wear me out. I understand, Sorla laughed, but even though Sorla knew all too well that the world was full of awful people, she thrived on crowds when they were the right kind. She was even quite good at turning somewhat difficult people around. She knew Grau and Velsa would never follow her to the big city, but it was the place she dreamed of being as soon as she could get there. Grau doesn't always understand my fascination with machines, Velsa continued more seriously. And sometimes we don't have the same opinions about how Finarlum's lives should or could go in the future either. As you know, we have a lively debate now and then, but we trust each other enough to disagree sometimes. You'll be meeting a lot of new people in Lioness, and they'll probably have more diverse points of view than in a town like this too, so if you carry one thing with you from home, I hope it's that. Not everyone has to agree with you, but they do have to be worthy of your trust. Chapter 6. You can use your telepathy from out here, can't you? Sorla asked Velsa. I think I'd like to meet him by myself. If I do decide he'd make a safe traveling companion, well, I want to see how we'd get along without anyone else in the way. Oh no, you think I'm a meddlesome mother, Velsa said, laughing a little. No, I think if he is really ghastly, 2 reactions will be worse than 1. I certainly don't want to judge him on his appearance and not his character. If you stay outside and use your telepathy from afar, you'll be able to do that with a clear mind. That's very true, and we certainly do want to judge him on his character. Velsa and Sorla stopped walking just outside of Dalaran's home, a narrow building sandwiched firmly between 2 larger houses. He was just a renter of the shabby place. The dark curtains were always closed, but smoke trailed out of the slightly lopsided chimney. I remembered last night that I have met undead people before, Velsa added. The servants at Dormangara's castle. They looked all right, just a little pale. It was their behavior that was sort of odd and dead inside. They were very servile. Sounds like Finarlum with badly damaged souls. Yes, Velsa said, that was exactly it. Their souls were damaged to the point where there didn't seem to be much left of them. Well, quiet and servile might not be a bad thing for an escort to the capital. Sorla shrugged, trying to make the best of it, because she just wanted to get on with her shiny new life. But nerves were giving her a funny, weak-kneed feeling. She rapped the dragon-faced knocker on Dalaran's door. Ah, Sorla. Good morning. Didn't expect you so early. Dalaran was wearing a shabby robe that sat unevenly on his shoulders, black breeches, and wool slippers with ghastly pale calves in between that were probably as horrifying a sight as any undead person. Sorla was embarrassed for him. It's 11, she snapped. You were sleeping? I'm a creature of the night. Except when I see you prowling all over town by day. Dalaran ran a hand through his mussed curls and regarded her with somewhat stupefied, bloodshot eyes. Well, I'm a creature of whenever I happen to be awake. Come in. Oof, I should have asked to meet somewhere else. Sorla whacked her hands down the front of her skirt as if to straighten herself out as a counterpart to Dalaran's hovel. The ground floor of the building was a single room with a large hearth for cooking and a few haphazard chairs. The alarming tools of a necromancer's trade were crowding tables and shelves, skulls and specimens preserved in jars, sinister-looking little instruments and leaky dark vials. Sorla wrapped her arms around herself. At least the floor is swept, and there is a surprising lack of cobwebs. My cousin tidied up just a bit, Dalaran said. You'll appreciate that, I'm sure. Hopefully I'm not here long enough to appreciate it, Sorla said. The Vendiri always made her nervous. They were the only Daramons who lived among the Miralem, where they enjoyed freedom to practice their religion. They felt that the entire point of life was to dance with death, learning to communicate with the spirit world until it finally closed in on them, at which point this transition was treated with intense pomp and ritual, with mourning stages that lasted for years. They were also the only people who studied necromancy and knew the ways of bringing the dead back. Sorla had seen dead people, and the last thing she wanted was to consider stiff, cold flesh and dead eyes suddenly snapping back to awareness and struggling to move again. The Vendiri might be allies, but they did tend to make everyone nervous. "Door, come down. That girl's here," Dalaran yelled upstairs. "Do you want some coffee?" he offered, and then he said, "Never mind, you don't need to eat or drink." "I don't think people offer visitors drinks because they show up with a desperate thirst," Sorla said dryly, but the sarcasm was lost. Of course Dalaran would show the opposite of generosity, but she didn't trust the cleanliness of his cups anyway. Heavy footsteps thumped down the stairs. Their owner seemed to have a limp and to be a large man, as Dalaran said. "Oh dear, he is going to be some sort of monster." Sorla lifted her face, vowing to greet him without fear. The stairs in the corner twisted upward into the shadows, and from this twist came dusty boots and the long hem of a traveling coat. Then loose black sleeves, a pale face, and dark, tired eyes. Although his pallor wasn't exactly healthy, and scar tissue marred his cheek from jaw to temple, Sorla's first impression was that he didn't look like a horrifying monster, at least. No, definitely not. She might have even dared to say he was as ugly handsome as Seldon. But he didn't look exactly well, either. He came down the stairs the rest of the way, and his limp was pronounced, and his face was the only visible part of his body. The rest of him was swathed in black, including gloves. If he had anything to hide, one would never know, past the gloomy fashion sense of the Vendiri. The only adornments on his all-black ensemble were silver clasps on his coat and thin silver earrings in the shape of vials. She was pretty sure they meant he'd handled potions in the military, confirmed by the potion dart gun at his hip, while he had a long dagger at the other. He was nearly a foot taller than Dalaran and naturally broad. Sorla's neck creaked when she tried to look up at him, like her joints weren't even broken in for that angle. She immediately looked down again. She hated how tall some people could be when she was so small herself. In theory, she should have been able to be tall too. Her body should be anything she wanted, but Fenarlem female skeletons only came in one size, 5 feet tall, just big enough to work and look somewhat grown up, but not 1 inch more. It was maddening. Maybe when I become an acclaimed baker to the royals and have saved my money, I can order a custom skeleton and stop looking up at everyone. "I'm leaving today," Dor told her without introduction, speaking like he was trying not to wince with some ache or pain, baring his own fangish teeth. "You can come with me, if you like. It doesn't matter. I have a 2-seater carriage and a good horse. I'll push as fast as I can. Might sleep outside or in barns. Won't be fancy." "I don't need fancy," Sorla said, a little warily. She tried to probe his mind, gently, because her telepathy wasn't very good, and she didn't want him to catch her. Although Daramons didn't have active telepathic abilities, some of them were still surprisingly defensive, and getting caught prying into someone's mind was an offense that would ruin any alliance before it began. Miralem tended to be less sensitive about it, because they were prying right back. To them it was another way of sizing someone up. Shock, pain, anger, lost friends, betrayal. How could they leave us out here to die? His mind had just left the battlefield. She didn't know how long he'd been back from the dead, but apparently not long enough to shake such visceral memories. "Didn't like what you saw, did you?" he said. "Well, don't worry, I won't hurt you, and I'll stay out of trouble on the road. I have no taste for violence." "I'm sorry for prying." "You have to scope me out for your own safety. That's wise," he said. His voice was hoarse, like he'd breathed in something toxic. While he might not be a monster, he was definitely an unnerving traveling companion. Here in their tucked-away town, the war felt very far away. He brought all of its terrors right into the room, and his death and revival had clearly been hard on his soul. That she could sense from even the briefest contact. But he won't hurt me. I am sure of that, and if Elsa agrees, well, he's just a way of getting to my goal. Once I see Seldon and the Royal Bakery, the journey will be forgotten. And then I don't really want a traveling companion who looks too gentle either. Fnarlem do get kidnapped now and then, so maybe the fact that he unnerves me a little is perfect. I'll go, she said. I just need to go home and get my clothes and things. That's fine, he said. Just don't get too caught up in goodbyes. Sorla swallowed at the thought of goodbyes. I won't. Eat some of this soup before you go, Dalarian told his cousin, and I'll pack the rest up. I don't want food. I don't care. It's an important part of the healing process, and you know what happens if you don't. I didn't want to come back. Everybody says that at first. You have packing to do, don't you? Dorothea said to Sorla in his rough voice, and she nodded and quickly fled. She wasn't eavesdropping, but she felt guilt all the same. She whisked out the door, and Velsa was waiting right outside. You decided to go with him, didn't you? He's not dangerous to me, if you agree with that assessment at least. I think he will leave you alone except to keep any other trouble away. But are you sure? The poor man. It's very hard to look into the minds of people who come back from war. He didn't want to come back, Sorla said, but maybe I can cheer him up a little. You're very good at cheering people up, Velsa agreed. He said he didn't feel like eating, but I'll bring him a chocolate cream tart, Sorla decided. The journey didn't sound so bad if she thought of Dorothan not as a big, intimidating dead man, but as an unfortunate war hero in need of some reminders of why life was worth living. He was not unlike their first cottage here, which was full of dust and rodent droppings, but which Sorla soon had polished to a shine. Chapter 7. Just 2 days ago, Dor awoke from a living nightmare. He had been trying to scream, but his voice was ragged. No one was coming for him. He was a broken body in a puddle of cold mud. Another man was dying beside him, an enemy. Dor had blinded him with poison. Then an explosion tossed them both, and Dor listened to the other man sobbing out, I can't see. I don't want to die like this. Who's there? Is anybody there? Please, somebody. Please help. Mayrin. May. No one was there except Dor, who was dying himself. He thought about reaching out his hand and taking the enemy's in his own, but when he dragged his eyes down to his body, there was no hand left to reach. There was barely an arm. They would die slowly, in dragged-out pain. They were both Daramons with magical blood that would try to heal them until they lost too much. I'm sorry, the man choked. Dor would never know what he was sorry for, but it was easy to feel sorry in this moment. He was sorry to never see his family again, sorry for the pain they would feel when they heard, but they would take comfort in his bravery. I was here to maim the enemy. That's what they told me to do, and I did it. His own vision slowly closed in, cold seeping into his bones. Suddenly the withering cries were gone, along with the toxic, smoky smell and the bitter cold. He was safe in bed, surrounded by candlelight and the smell of herbs, completely disoriented. He had never seen this room before, but he knew the smell of these particular herbs and what they were used for. I wondered if you'd ever wake. I don't know if you remember me. I'm your cousin Dalaran. We were kids last time we saw each other at the Rithens Day Fair. I stole the toy you were playing with, and you hit me. A face looked down at him with a family resemblance, but nothing comforting about it. Dor remembered this incident, yes. He was 9, and Dalaran stole his treasured figure of Morarith, the Shadow Walker, and returned it sans one articulated bone leg. Thought you might be too far gone, Dalaran continued with tight relief, and suddenly Dor was struggling to get out of bed. His body was cold and stiff and sluggish, despite the crackling fire and the warm civilian clothes. They would have dressed up my corpse before they sent it home, of course. Dor knew all the protocol of the battlefield necromancers. They didn't revive, no time for that, but they would preserve as many bodies as they could, washed, dressed, and magically suspended. Dor knew the men who had likely saved him, and he had worked with them, helping them because his own specialty as a battlefield apothecary overlapped theirs. He didn't realize how it would feel. I don't feel right, he coughed, choking on his own voice. My body isn't working right. That's exactly how it goes, Dalaran said. Especially in your case, cousin. Your comrades must have really liked you. They went to a lot of damn trouble to put you back together. Or something resembling you anyway. You need some tonic. You know how it goes. Then lots of rest, food, piss and shit. Gotta get all the rusty clockwork going again. Then lots more rest. You won't feel as dead as you do right now forever. I need to get home, Dor said. He wanted his own bed and his family, and he didn't care if it was embarrassing for a grown man. Everyone wanted their mothers on the battlefield. He would never forget the sound of that man who died beside him, crying for his mother. First Mayron, but soon just a childish plea. You need 2 weeks of rest at least. Not here, not with you. The dead are so ungrateful, Dalaran murmured. Well, if you can make it home, I won't stop you, but I'd strongly advise rest first. Dor forced himself out of bed. Every muscle in his body felt stiff, cold, and unfamiliar. Through sheer willpower, he slumped to the door. He was shivering, but his brow tickled like it was trying to remember how to sweat. By the spirits, man, give yourself a break, Dalaran groaned. You'll feel 1,000 times better in a couple of weeks. You're like any other man who's been injured in battle. Take your tonic and rest up, and your body will start working again. I just want to go home, Dor said, but he realized he couldn't go anywhere yet and reluctantly got back into bed. Now a few days had passed, and his body was remembering how to work. Magic and non-magical life seemed to be at war inside him, his heart slowing to almost nothing and then kicking into a normal rhythm and back again, his digestion struggling with more than broth, his breath ragged. As the nightmares of the battle were no longer so fresh, he could reason with himself. Dalaran was right. Soon his body would be functioning again in such a way that he would forget magic kept him alive now. Mostly. Then he learned just what Dorvin and Sarlengar had done to keep him alive. He could imagine them walking the battlefield together after, seeing the bodies of friends, trying to decide who was revivable. Dor could tell he had been too damaged to save under any normal circumstance. They took a chance because they liked him. There was no other explanation. As soon as he could walk, he announced his departure. He procured a horse and carriage, and then Dalaran asked if he might be willing to take a girl with him. Why? Dor asked, as he had never been less in the mood for female company. She needs a ride, and we help each other out in this town. I would hope people help each other out in every town. She's a resourceful type. I doubt she'll need anything from you except that extra seat in your carriage. She's just a doll girl. Doesn't even need to eat or pee every hour like some women I've traveled with. A Finarlem. Dor didn't expect to find Finarlem this far into Miralem country. At least a Finarlem girl couldn't rightly judge him for being dragged from the dead and pieced together. That basically described their entire race. She was probably an escaped slave, and most of them were kind of funny looking, but that was preferable right about now. At least he wouldn't be too ashamed to be in the company of a fellow wretched soul. Fine, if she doesn't mind that I'm not feeling conversational. She'll stop by tomorrow morning, Dalaran said. Dor tried his best to get ready for the journey, forcing down some broth, procuring a horse. Thanks to his honest friends, he showed up with his money in an inner pocket of his clothes, sweeping the cobwebs from Dalaran's squalid bachelor apartment, and generally forcing his sluggish body to move, so Dalaran could see he was good to go. In the morning, just as promised, the Finarlem girl appeared downstairs, neatly dressed, bright-eyed, with glossy black curls pinned back with ribbons, completely and undeniably adorable, and looking like she was trying very hard not to be unnerved by him. Great. Chapter 8. Sorla thought she could say goodbye bravely without crying. She was very wrong. She could hardly stop crying. It hit her just how much having a family had meant to her, as if she had never let herself fully acknowledge what Grau and Velsa meant to her until she was setting off on her own. It's okay. Velsa smoothed her hair like a real mother. We'll write and we'll visit and you'll visit, and this isn't goodbye at all. Then she started sobbing too, because if Sorla really found a home in Lioness, it really was goodbye. Sorla was never going to make such a journey back. Once in a while, Grau and Velsa might visit Mr. Trinavel, the Finarlem maker in Lioness, but most physical repairs could be done at home. Grau got that lopsided, pained smile that meant he was trying not to show his emotions, and brought out a dagger in a sheath that he often carried himself. Take this, in case you do need protection. I'm sure I won't. But I'll feel better if you do. It has a little burning magic in it, so if you really concentrate, it'll heat up like a poker, but it won't make fire. Thank you, she choked out. I'll be honored to carry it. I mean, it's nothing fancy. I bought it off a blanket at a bazaar for 3 elan, but I can't send you off unarmed. Somehow Sorla managed to pry herself away, eternally grateful that Finarlem didn't have tears, and pulled herself back together. Dalaran was lurking outside of his own house like a bandit, motioning her close. I need one favor out of... Oh no, Sorla jerked back. I knew it. I should have known better than to... Not a favor for me, doll. Take care of him. He's no danger to you, but he's also not well. When you come back from the spirit world like that, well, it's hard. He has to take his tonic and eat a real meal every day. Just make sure he does that. That's all I'm asking. I don't want his parents to blame me for sending him home too far gone. What happens if he doesn't take his tonic and eat? If his body doesn't get back to real living, bad things happen. Like what? That hardly sounds safe. His soul will start to go. And if his soul dies, well, let me just say, if he tries to drink any raw blood, head straight for the nearest sorcerer and tell them what's happening. Sorla fumed. I'm the one who was looking for protection going to Lioness, not to babysit someone who might turn into a monster. I'm going back home after I said goodbye and everything. No, I promise it's not likely to happen. He ate a little, and most men tend to listen more when a pretty young woman bosses them than when I do it. I just don't want anything bad to happen after his friends went to that much trouble to save him. Sorla probably would have gone home if it wasn't for that phrasing. His friends went to so much trouble. In any other circumstance, Dalaran surely would have mentioned his own efforts to save the man. He was always the first, and usually only one, to sing his own praises. There must be something about Dor's circumstances he found genuinely touching. Okay, she sighed. I'll make sure he eats. Making sure people eat is probably one of my greatest talents. Exactly, you're the perfect person for the job. No cheap flattery out of you. You just had to call me doll after knowing me all this time. What's wrong with it? You're a cute doll. I guess it's better to be a cute doll than a loser who can't bother dressing properly for company, Sorla growled at him. I'm home, and clothes are itchy. Dalaran swung the door open. After you. Sorla had Blueberry perched on her shoulder, and she had just fed him, so his lazy head was snuggled against her neck. Dora was nesting some glass bottles and paper within a crate, and she worried he might tell her he didn't want Blueberry along, but he hardly seemed to notice her beloved pet. Dora finally looked up at her, grimacing. Clearly he was in pain. Are we ready? Sorla asked, trying to stay cheerful. Yes, come on. She followed him through the narrow room to the back alley where a 2-seater carriage and a handsome horse of the shaggy northern type awaited them. What a nice little carriage, Sorla said, pleasantly surprised. I told you, he's the rich cousin, Dalaran said. Well, you two stay safe out there. Dora was loading the bottles into the small stowage area of the carriage, and she climbed up onto the seat before he felt the need to offer her help. She sat there, wriggling her toes, feeling generally self-conscious. Then the seat creaked as he sat beside her. Fates, why does he have to be so damn tall? She hardly had any curves to speak of either, and it was hard not to wish she was a Miralem woman with the strong and feminine frame of a warrior. Ho! He twitched the reins. Sorla sat frozen, watching all of the extremely familiar places of home slowly pass by. The shops with living quarters above and thatched roofs, Marin Pelladeer's chickens skittering out of their way, the horse clopping over one of the stone bridges crossing the shallow creeks that wove around the town. I just wish he'd say something. Some little pleasantry. I get the feeling he'll be annoyed if I say something first. His mind was so heavy and troubled. She couldn't ignore it. She wanted to fix him right up. Of course, only telepathic healers could really help men who came back from the war in a bad way. That is, outside of time. But time was very slow, and Sorla was not very patient. Now they were passing the small herb farm run by Laura Sell, an older woman who had once been the town midwife and had trained all the current town midwives. This meant they would soon be past the street Sorla walked every day. It was odd he hadn't even mentioned she was a Finarlem. It seemed like whenever Sorla met a stranger, they had to tell her about some other Finarlum they knew once, or give her some kind of general condolences for being what she was, which was particularly aggravating. It was like he hadn't even noticed. Well, how often have I wished someone would just treat me like a normal person? I guess this is it. Are you reading my mind? He said suddenly. No. You looked deep in concentration. I can't read minds. I'm not that good. I'm just wondering what you're about. So you would read my mind if you were that good. No. I think you already know. There's nothing good to read, he said. War is insanity. I don't know how I could have ever thought otherwise. Fabern was a soldier, she said, nodding as if she understood. Sorla had seen a little of war, but probably not enough to really understand. She wasn't sure about Grau. Troubles had a way of bouncing off of him, or maybe he was good at burying them. How long were you in the military? 4 years, but only some months on the front lines. He looked far into the distance. I'm a coward, maybe. I'm sure you're not, Sorla said, vaguely troubled by this conversation. The war had been going on for a long time now, years, almost as long as she could remember, depending on how you named the start of it, as it had brewed slowly with increasing border skirmishes. By the time the colonites formally declared war, it was like hearing a woman was having a baby just weeks before the due date. A number of young men and women had gone to fight, and some had died, but not as many as in larger cities. Farmers weren't drafted. Food was a necessity. The Miralem hadn't lost yet, but it also didn't feel like they were winning. It was starting to feel like there would always be a war, and people would keep dying, and nothing would come of it, which had plenty of people wondering what the point was anyway. Sorla didn't like thinking about it. She opened her bag. Blueberry came to life at the rustle. Would you like a chocolate tart? I made them this morning. She pushed her pet's long nose back from the bag. No. He added, no thank you, with a belated nod to manners. Of all the things I make, everyone says these are the very best, she said. If you just try one little bite, I'll leave you alone. She felt she could not allow him to refuse food. Dallorian hinted that horrible things would happen if he didn't eat, and she wanted to see him eat something right now. Not now. In exactly 1 hour, then, she said. Promise me. Exactly, eh? Do you have a clock on your person? He asked, faintly bemused. Then he turned her, as if she'd exhausted him, and she was startled by the sudden full eye contact. It forced her to give him a fresh assessment, and realize that he was just a normal man after all, and not that old either. He was probably no more than 30, just the age of men that would court her, if anyone was interested, not that they were. He had a somewhat craggy look, and something about his face seemed uneven, although she couldn't pinpoint what it was. But he had a very good nose, and Sorla could appreciate a good nose. He also had enviable hair, very black and thick, with a loose curl, unruly and directionless. Sorla loved hair like that, but she didn't know very many people who possessed it. She had to roll her hair with wet rags and then lightly work in perfumed oil to set a curl. If she had a type, and Seldon was that type, Dor was uncomfortably close to making that cut as well. He held out a hand. Just give me a piece now, and we'll be done with this. Otherwise, I'll eat when we get where we're going. She broke off a piece, as best she could, since it was creamy. It stuck to her fingers, and she had to sort of wipe it into his palm. He smacked the palm to his mouth while she licked her fingers. At first bite, something crossed his face. His pale skin and tired eyes briefly seemed to shake off the specter of death. He licked his lips, although they were clean. He looked surprised, then thoughtful, then turned to her again. I'll have the rest, he said. Okay, my voice is getting very tired, so I'm going to stop there. If I continue this, I should be able to do it in 7 installments if I'm able to keep up the same rate, which seems reasonable. Anyway, let me know if you enjoy this kind of content, if it's something that maybe you can listen to as you drift off to sleep or you're getting work done. I don't expect it to be like super popular video, but if it brings benefit to some of you, then I'll keep up with the series. I recorded the little extra bits separately, so I'll pop those in here. The other day, I ended up not having time to record any extra talk at the end of the video. Plus my voice was getting really tired. So I'm just going to do it now, really casual. I don't have a lot of time now either, and the lighting is not great, but you know, this is more of a voice video anyway. So I just want to talk a little bit about those first few chapters that I read. So Doll Girl Meets Dead Guy, well, I should say Sorla's story, was a story that I had been thinking about ever since I finished writing The Sorcerer's Equal in 2017. I was curious right away to go back and see how Sorla turned out. I think she's 14 when The Sorcerer's Equal ends, and she's kind of just getting interested in boys, and she's working, and you know, she's growing up. And I kept wondering about her. And for a while, I really thought I was going to write about her and Prince Seldon, that he was going to end up having this slow burning thing with her over letters, and that they then meet again after all this time, and there'd be all these troubles with him being in love with a Finarlum. But part of the reason I didn't write it is because that plot just didn't really feel right. And I think part of it is that there would be such a power imbalance between them, and it's not like you can't have a power imbalance in a romance. I've written quite a few that do, but it didn't really fit their characters. Sorla is a very practical girl, and Seldon, for that matter, I think he's a pretty practical prince as well. I just couldn't really see them going ahead with a romance that was going to be so difficult, and for it to really work out for them. So I knew that I wanted to resolve the Prince Seldon situation, as well as give her a new love interest. And I started thinking kind of loosely about setting her up with a Vendiri guy. The Vendiri, at this point in history, are probably more accepting of Finarlum than any other flesh and blood people. The way their belief system is, they just don't have any moral problem with bringing a soul back from the afterlife and putting them into an artificial body. So I had the vague idea, and I think I started thinking that she could be with a guy who was brought back from the dead, just because, like, I don't know, that's always fun. A little Frankenstein's monster in there. But it still wasn't completely clicking, and that was when this book came out, and as soon as I heard about The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, I thought, this sounds like such a me book. It sounded so quirky, and the main character kind of runs a magical funeral home, and then the love interest is like a grumpy marshal who is tasked with patrolling the strange and magical wilds of Tanria. You don't even really know, like, what is Tanria, what is his job when you start it, but anyway, you kind of got like this ranger guy in a magical funeral home, but a world that's like sort of modern. Anyway, for whatever magical reason that sometimes a book inspires another book, or anything, a video game, an anime, what have you, can just like click the pieces that you already have floating together in your mind and congeal them for you. This book did that for me with Doll Girl. I already knew what I wanted to do with it, but it just wasn't coming together. And for some reason, as soon as I read The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, it all just clicked beautifully. I knew that I wanted that same kind of like grumpy sunshine romance, the same rich world building, quirky world. I mean, I already had that, and the story really started to just flow out of me from there. It was also a lot of fun to revisit Velsa and Grau for a minute and see how their relationship had changed over time. I think a lot of my work ends up kind of addressing what it's like to be a woman. Like, I love men. I've always been someone who has a lot of male friends and is into things that guys like, and just generally has a pretty equal balance of friends. But, you know, we can't ignore that there is still imbalance between the expectations of women and being a woman in a relationship versus the man. I end up having a lot of stories that deal with those tiny frustrations of being a woman, and particularly a wife in my romance. That, like, I love Grau. He is a wonderful husband, and he really goes through a lot for Velsa. So I love him, and I think he's great. But I did like getting to hear a little bit from Velsa that, you know, Grau is kind of still this absent-minded professor sort of character doing his thing with potions, and he's been tinkering for years. It hasn't been going as well as he might like, Velsa still supports him and believes in him, that he's going to figure out some great potion. But she probably has put aside some of her own dreams and ambitions for both her adopted daughter and her husband, because she didn't really come in with a huge particular ambition of her own. But she's definitely got like some fire in her soul, and she will do something with herself. And Sorla has picked up on that over the years. Their relationship has changed a lot too. In the Cursed Soul trilogy, Sorla really prefers Grau. He's like fun dad, and Velsa is just dealing with a lot. Sorla is really drawn to the fun dad energy. She has never even seen like a fun dad in her life. Darumons are not very fun at that point in history. But by the time we get to this book, just in the little conversation between Sorla and Velsa, I could feel that Sorla has developed a lot more empathy for Velsa and supports her a lot more and really wants her to get her chance in life to do something with all of her intelligence and talents. So that was a cool chapter to write. A lot of chapters like that with character development where you just kind of let the characters start talking and then you learn things about them that you didn't necessarily intend to put on the page. Those are often my favorite little moments. So I think that's about all I have to say about this batch of chapters, but I will have more little tidbits if I continue the series. I don't know. Let me know if you're enjoying the reading as well as the little extra bits at the end, whether you'd rather just have one or the other or neither. I don't know, but anyway, this channel still has a lot of experimentation. Anyway, if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to check out more of my books, there's links in the description, and I have my monthly Patreon and Substack where I have a weekly Q&A, or at least a semi-weekly Q&A. And my $5 Patreon tier gets you access to my Discord server, extra videos, works in progress, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and I will see you next time. Bye.